Hey Year 12s, hope you're enjoying your lockdown and learning from home is going all right. Welcome to the first lesson for this week. I'll be doing these YouTube videos and we'll be working from the OneNote in order to kind of go through our content this week. So let's get stuck into it. This week's lesson is all on madness. So the theme of madness is what we're exploring. We've looked at family relationships, we've looked at gender. Remember, you should be emailing me through your paragraphs to get some of that feedback. It's really important you're doing those analytical paragraphs so we can look at where your gaps are and figure that out as we go along. So the first part is we're going to click this link here and that will take you to a video on madness. There's also a YouTube link here you can use if that one doesn't work. Let me know if it doesn't work. Kind of fiddling with how to incorporate it into the OneNote. And we have a series of questions down here. So there is a selection of 10 questions that you will need to answer in relation to the video. Some of these aren't explicitly stated in the video, so you might have to think a little bit. So go into it a bit more and really think about what's actually happening in that moment for madness for King Lear in the video. Also remember, take some extra notes. The madness is one of the central themes. It's going to be really beneficial if you have extra notes and information that really explains the bits and pieces you might have missed. Take notes of quotes that you think might be important. All that's going to be really helpful in the future. So pause the video here and try those 10 questions as you watch the video on madness. I'm not going to go through those answers just yet. We'll have a chat in one of our lessons this week about your responses. It's a bit too easy if I just give you the answers here. So we're going to move on to the next section. I'm going to give you some information on madness and what it is, and then we've got an extra few activities here. So one question that I kind of want you to really think about is what is, in particular, think about it through the lens of Jacobean society. So what is it that madness was back then, and how do we look at it differently now, and how can we track Lear's madness through the play? So in Shakespeare's time, attitudes and responses to madness were harsh and unsympathetic. It's not like today. The mad were thought to be possessed by devils and therefore had to be confined and whipped to expel the demonic spirits. So we have those religious undertones of what madness and mental health was back then. Held in secure hospitals like Bethlehem in London, from where we get the word Bedlam, and we know poor Tom, Bedlam Tom is referred to as that, Mad Tom. It links back to that hospital, so there's a bit of an allusion there. And the insane provided a grotesque form of entertainment for curious, well-to-do onlookers. So there wasn't really an understanding of what it was. And madness is an elastic concept and would be perceived differently in Jacobean England than today. So the late 16th and 17th century was a very interesting time in history. There were a complicated multitude of different, frequently contradictory viewpoints. People did not understand it. And those different perceptions often reflected the turmoil and conflicts in thinking about religion, politics, and natural philosophy. So he was one of the contemporary playwrights at the time to use madness as this rich source of drama. And we see madness in a few different ways. If you think back to Macbeth, we have Lady Macbeth's madness of the blood on her hands and washing, and that repetitive OCD-like washing of their hands. Lear's madness is different to that. But again, it's that rich kind of source of information, as they were used as weapons in social control and stigmatizing certain people, for example, witches and nonconformists. So it kind of links to those ideas too. And there's a couple of these definitions of madness that I took from a pamphlet from 1592. So Shakespeare did use aspects of this pamphlet in his writing and quotes it. So it's a good resource to kind of see the angle and the perspective that Shakespeare is coming at madness from. So we have three definitions of madness here. Furor, the fury, the rage, madness, from Latin furor, to rage, an entire and full blindness or darkening of the understanding of the mind, whereby a man knows not at all what he does or says. So that was one form of madness. Delirium is another one, and this is that weakens of conceit and consideration, which we call dotage, when a man, through age or infirmity, falls to be child again in discretion, albeit he understands what is said and can happily speak somewhat pertinently onto sundry matters. So we have this different perspective. There's the anger madness, but also this childlike delirium almost, where the person's there and interacting but different. And we can probably link these back to mental health issues in today's society and kind of link them to diagnosable conditions. We also have dementia, from the Latin demens, the senseless, mad, foolish. So a passion of the mind, bereaving the light of understanding, or when a man's perceivance and understanding of all things is taken away. So dementia, this idea of a lack of understanding, a lack of awareness. So there's a question I want you to answer here. how does Leah's madness relate to these three different definitions? And again, we'll talk about this in one of our online sessions this week, but I want you to have a think about Leah's madness. How does that relate to these definitions? We have three definitions here, and I think you can see elements of Leah in all of them. But what moments in the play do you think really line up with those definitions? So pause the video here and have a go at answering that question. How does Leah's madness relate to these three different definitions? Costume change, you got too cold. After you've done that activity, the purpose of madness in Shakespeare. So Shakespeare seems to be particularly interested in madness as an agent of beneficial change. In his plays, suffering can transform characters' views of themselves and others. So in tragedies, we often see how madness leads to clearer perception. Leah, like other tragic heroes, in Hamlet, remember watching the play, those who saw it, Hamlet's madness. It leads to clarity for the character. It leads to growth. And we see that in Hamlet, we see that in King Lear, we see aspects of that in Macbeth as well. But they find calmness, understanding after their journey of mental suffering. And Lear is the same in that. At the end, he is resigned to where his life goes and almost happy with what's happened. So for Lear, Lear's mind is tormented and unsettled by his experiences. However, the madness he is suffering from is not just an individual struggle. It's reflected at both natural and social levels. So this madness of Lear, we can see in the storm, most obviously in nature, but also things like the eclipse that occurs and the surrounding kind of natural elements of the world mirror King Lear's own journey. We also see it socially, and it's an important point here that his abdication and division of the kingdom would have been seen as politically insane, like something you just don't do. And this is reflected in the chaotic events. So what happens, the cruelty, the blindness, the madness, the death, they're all signals of society going wrong. And we see that perpetuated throughout the entire play. The fact that in King Lear making these decisions that are based on his madness, it leads to chaos in society and the breaking down of the social structures in society. Society falling apart and society too turning mad. And Lear's madness is one of a selfish and stubborn old man. He makes misjudgments and morally questionable decisions, which lead to a breakdown. And we have quotes like, "Oh fool, I shall go mad." We also have poor Tom and Edgar, but he puts on the madness. So this is similar to Hamlet, and there's a question over whether Hamlet is actually mad or whether it is put on. But poor Tom, very obviously, is acting a part here and puts on the madness of a Bedlam beggar. He uses that madness as a disguise, as a cloak, so people don't notice him, and he can situate himself into society and into situations, but be seen as an outsider. And we also have the Fool, but the Fool's madness is professional. He's eccentric, witty, and exposes weakness and folly. So the things he says appear mad, but beyond it, he's very smart, quick-witted, and intellectual. So his madness, again, is kind of like a guise that allows him to say the things he can say. So quotes like, "May not an ass know when the cart draws the horse?" He has these turns of phrases that are insightful, and it kind of provides a juxtaposition to both Lear and the position he's supposed to hold. So Lear is that rage and thoughtlessness, whereas the Fool is very quick-witted and precise with the way he uses language and the way he says and the madness that he has. So let's map Lear's journey through the madness. This is going to be really relevant for the question up here where you're mapping his madness. But we can see it through the act. So in Act 1, Lear's tendency to mental instability is established. So Regan tells us he hath ever but slenderly known himself. So he has rarely known himself. He subjects his daughters to a bizarre love trial, which is in itself mad, banishes his loyal advisor Kent, and disowns Cordelia. He reacts with violent curses to Goneril's challenge. So his madness in Act 1 is that rage and real anger. Lear's sanity is undermined by his obsession with filial ingratitude, the unnatural behaviour of Goneril and Regan. So these are the things that kind of set him off. Infuriated by Kent's punishment in the stocks, Regan's refusal to speak to him, and Goneril's alliance with her sister, Lear rants impotently about revenge. Fearing the onset of madness, he storms out of Gloucester's castle. So we can see again madness here playing a role in his descent, in that build-up of madness, and that like focusing on revenge almost, and that rage that he feels. In Act 3, Lear's moods swing violently from raging in the storm to quieter sympathy for those less fortunate than himself, the poor naked wretches that he realizes in his kingdom. So here's where we see a revelation from the madness. The madness, he is raging at the storm, but in that moment of his insanity, he also realizes like where he's gone wrong and realizes what events and decisions has led him to where he is. So Lear's mad companions, the fool and poor Tom, deepen the sense of his decline into insanity. Rather than surrounding himself with the aristocracy of society, he now is aligned with characters such as the fool and poor Tom, who is putting on that insanity as well. He rips off his clothes here as well, off you lendings, and hallucinates about devilish spirits. So we can see the madness turning more hallucinogenic and more deep here. But again, we can see this aspect that he is recognizing things, and there's clarity from the madness. This interesting juxtaposition between insane in mind, but clarity in like focus and in decisions of the world and recognition of past mistakes. Act 4, a stage directed in scene 5 indicates enter Lear, and in brackets mad. So talking to the blinded Gloucester, Lear's language combines sexual loathing with hallucinations about hell and damnation. So maybe I think it is his own regret and fear of his life and what he's done with his life. He says, let copulation thrive. There is the sulphurous pit, burning, scalding stench, consumption. And Lear's disordered thoughts here range over mortality, justice, and authority, and erupt in savage emotions. And when I have stolen upon these son-in-laws, then kill. And at last reunited with Cordelia, Lear's mental torment ceases. So it's interesting there. Think about why. Like, what does Cordelia represent that calms his madness, and soothes that madness of his? But in finally Act 5, the cruel murder of Cordelia again threatens Lear's wits once more. He says, howl. He dies, his final words suggesting that he's deluding himself with the thought that she lives. So we can see a real descent into madness through King Lear, which provides insight into him as a character and the purpose of madness in this play. We can really dive into that a little bit more, I think. So you have some activities here that are hopefully going to help with your understanding of this scene. So we should have watched the video on madness and answer the questions at the top here. And then we're going to create a graph depicting Lear's madness throughout the play. So on one axis should be time or events, and the other should be the level of madness. So how does Lear's level of power correlate to his madness? We should be noticing these things. For example, we can use the draw tool here. I think I might be able to draw it in here. Yeah. So if we're drawing like a little, it's going to be super rough, but T over here for time, M over here for madness. And if you were to map Lear's madness, so if we were looking at it, you'd probably put him maybe down this end at the start. He is angry, he's furious, but it's not insanity in the traditional sense just yet. So we can map a little bit of that and graph his madness over time. But I'd like you to add an events too here. So put a little line here, and you can go back to using the text box tool. Here, I think it is. Yeah. So we use that textbook tool to say vanishes Cordelia, or whatever it might be. You guys will make this look a lot better. But we can see here that we can map Lear's madness and his descent into it. So think about the events that trigger the level of madness increasing. I just realized that is wrong. So this should be madness here, time here. So that way, as time progresses, his madness will fluctuate. So yeah, mapping out his madness through that graph. Next activity, how does Lear's madness position the audience to think about him? So respond to that question. How does Lear's madness position the audience to think about him as a character? Madness is Lear's form of suffering throughout the play. What is Gloucester's? So again, using your knowledge. What do you know about what happens to Gloucester? We know what happens to Lear. How are they different, and how does Gloucester suffer? Because suffering is a key thing in Shakespeare's tragedies. The characters must suffer to recognise their wrongdoings, which we see in King Lear at the end. And then we have a discussion question. King Lear's madness is imperative to the play. To what extent do you agree with the statement? Discuss using evidence from the play. So here I want you to kind of look into the importance of madness and why is it an important theme, an important concept that Shakespeare has used in the play. And remember to link that all with your BVAs and your analytical writing. So remember that process of analytical writing. In these paragraphs, I need to see your use of language and vocabulary, your connections with particular devices. See what quotes you can find. Hopefully we got some from that YouTube link. We should be finding our own as well. And seeing what we can find in relation to that. But let's get that paragraph done, and we'll email it through to the end of the lesson. And that would be lesson 1 done and dusted. So it's an exploration of Leah's madness in the play, and madness in general through the other characters. So that idea that the more madness King Lear exhibits, the more clarity he has. And tracking this madness, we can see it throughout the entire play. So yeah, really interesting concept, really important that you do understand this one. And we'll have a chat in our video sessions too about what this means and check some of those answers. So that's the end of today's lesson. So yeah, make sure you get stuck into those ones, answering those questions, and I'll be checking that work. Make sure you're sending it through to me to get that feedback, which will be really important. And we'll talk about it in our video sessions too, where we'll have a bit of time to discuss things and just check up and see how we're going. Talk soon.